In the documentation, a problem that we have often is, let's say, to write the documentation only once, and to write and to handle the fact that when we have a documentation written for a project, and then from this project at Red Hat, one of the things we do is we create a product. There are some cases where we have documentation, entirely new documentation for the product. And what we have tried to do and what we will demo here is how to write the documentation in the project and reuse the contents as much as possible for the product. That's what we call downstreaming at Red Hat for software engineering. And in documentation, basically, we can apply the same problem. So you see, you have the content for the upstream project. So we use that content to publish the community website, obviously. And then in downstream, we try to reuse that content with as little as possible specific content for the product to get the documentation for that. Here on the slide, you can see all the steps that are happening. So it's first step is we have collaboration between writers and engineers to contribute to the upstream repository. The engineers can help writers, or the writers can help engineers. I don't know what's the best way to express this. We have an immediate publication. So once the content is accepted by both parties, it goes to the documentation website. There is a release for the product, and the release results in a tag or in a branch in the upstream repository, and we can use this tag or this branch for the downstream content. On the downstream repository, we have to adapt to add specific content and to adapt the metadata. So we will get in detail on what this metadata can be later, but think about product name, product version, and so on. Once we have this content in the downstream repository and the release tag in the other repository, we can just let the continuous integration work. All the rest is automated with the limits of the production system that we have. Now, when you want to do that downstreaming thing, so when you want to reuse upstream content for downstream, you have to face some changes, some variations. It's very rare that all your content can be exactly the same in upstream and in downstream. And that's why just copying file is just not the solution. Now in these slides, I'm presenting all the features that the Antora ecosystem is offering to handle the complete use case. And later in the presentation, we'll go deeper in each of these features. The first feature, the most simple one, is just that Antora can handle multiple content sources, so you can combine different sources for the content. Let me give you example right away while speaking about it. In Eclipse Che, in the upstream documentation, we have something about the hosted version, user guide, administration guide, and extensions. And the downstream documentation has only the user guide and the administration guide, but has release notes added to that. So you can compose things from different sources. The user guide and administration guide comes from upstream. The release note is only downstream. Same thing for CSE. In upstream, we have a getting starting guide, and in downstream, we have the getting starting guide and the release notes. So that's for the multiple content sources. Then we have a first, very simple variation form, which is inline contents. And let me show you one example. It's here. You have in the upstream documentation, the product name is Eclipse Che. And in the product documentation, product name is Red Hat OpenShift Spaces. So that's the most simple thing. So, and how you do that? You use ASCII-doc attributes, and you define the attributes in the Antora component or in the Antora playbook, depending on the situation. Now, second sort of variations, you have block content variations. So that's just a chunk of text that is longer than one line, shorter than one page or one file. There is a good example here also. Here you have a list of stack samples. That's a definition list. And this list is specific to upstream. And in downstream, you have a table that has not exactly the same content, but a more organized content. That's a different block content. To do that, we use ASCII-doc features, so ASCII-doc attributes, ASCII-doc include statements, and we include files that have an attribute in it. So the file that is included upstream and downstream is not the same. And we use an Antora feature for that is Antora example. So we store the files in the examples directory. And we use the distributed component version feature of Antora to just add the files, add the example, the downstream example to the files that are in the content sources. And then the last thing is when you need to modify more than just a block content is when you need to remove or add an entire page. For example, in Eclipse Che, we have a complete section about installing Che locally. This is one section that we just don't have in the downstream documentation, meaning that we have to remove this content. And that's the most complex stuff that we do at the moment with Antora. The outline in Antora is defined by the navigation, and the navigation is pointing to pages. So we use these two Antora concepts, and we use the Antora Composer extension to just modify the navigation and to add or remove entire pages. You have to handle all of these variations. And then in the delivery, you have also some Antora features that are really nice and that we will cover later on. The first one is that on the upstream website, you can have some search. Let's say search dogs and what can you find? If you want to search an example, you can search. And then to do the downstreaming, Antora has a lot of files, a lot of small files. So each page is in a different file. You can have examples that are in different files, etc., etc. Handling these high number of files can be complex because you have to handle all the includes. But with the Antora assembler extension, you can take all of these files and put them in one single aggregate document that has no more include problems, and that's much easier to do the downstream. In the rest of the presentation, we will go on these different concepts one after the other. Here is an example, a little bit simplified, but not too much, of what we have in one downstream repository content. You can see here the first guide, the Getting Started guide. It's a documentation that has an upstream counterpart, so we have only partial content in that. We have only the metadata and some divergent content. And the second guide, the release notes, it's a piece of docs that is only downstream. And in this Antora module, we will have all the content. So we can mix that. And then we have the automation script. The documentation pipeline mainly is about, we have a first step that does the single sourcing. So it combines the content from the two repositories. Then we have second task that try to convert as our production system does. So the very important thing here to consider is that the convert step is taking the ASCII-doc source that is the build artifact from the preliminary step. So we have a pipeline where each step in the pipeline is producing something the next step is using. So the first step is producing ASCII-doc content, the second step is producing HTML files, and the third step is using the HTML files to test if the content is as we want it. And then we push everything back to the repository. So what's cool here is that to do a release, for example, I just have to change one metadata in the repository, and then the CI pipeline is doing all the rest for me. So I don't even have to worry about that. It's fully automated. Now let's talk about the foundation of what we are using. Are two features that are really something specific in ASCII-doc. Is the first feature is what we call ASCII-doc attributes, and it's basically variables, and that enables us to modify inline content, so simple content. And the second feature is we can have include statements, so we can include a file in ASCII-doc. That's something that you cannot do with Markdown, even with extended Markdown. And if you combine it with attributes, then you can have different block contents depending on the context. Let's go deeper. So just using ASCII-doc, not even Antora, you define an attribute in the upstream, you define an attribute in the downstream, and then you write your contents only once in upstream, and the output is different upstream and downstream. So that's very simple thing. That's the most common pattern. So it's you modify simple content. Then with ASCII-doc, you can have also a content written only once, and then the file that you include, you have the file for upstream, the file for downstream. So what's important to see in this slide and the previous one is that we have different outputs upstream and downstream, and in downstream we have as little code or content as possible. These two features, Antora is using them, but it's adding a lot more, really a lot more. The two last one is just what we saw from ASCII-doc. So you can use attributes, you can use includes to modify inline content and block content. Yes, that's what we want. But then Antora adds on top of that the ability to have multiple content sources, so to have the upstream content source and the downstream content source, and to combine them, so to do some overlapping of the content. And that's something that's more difficult to do with plain ASCII-doc. Combining different sources, that's really super simple with Antora. So basically, the upstream repository here is the most simple because it has only one source. It's the repository itself. And the downstream repository is more complex or is more complete because you combine the source from the upstream repository and the source from the downstream repository. In the example, it's the upstream is here the CRC repository, and then you can point the coordinate to a tag or to a branch in the upstream repository. An additional feature is to add new files. So we have a feature in Antora that is called distributed component version, and it means that if you have a content that has the same name and the same version, then Antora will try to combine the files, to add the files of the two content sources in the same bucket. There is one limitation to that, is that you cannot overwrite a file. So, meaning that we still need to have to differentiate the included files from upstream repository and from downstream repository with a different name. Let's say you have a different snippets of content. For example, for a container file, you would use a different base image in upstream and downstream. Or in your installation procedure, in upstream, that's the example here, you will download the source, you will build from that source, and then you can run it. And in downstream, you would just install a package and run the package. So when you want to do that, you can do an include statement where you use an attribute. And here in the upstream, the project context attribute is project. And in the downstream repository, the project context attribute is product. Meaning that in upstream, you will include the file project installing.adoc. And in downstream, you will include the file product installing.adoc. So this is really cool because now when you have content variation on something more complex, like a block of text, you can do that. In downstream, we are running ASCII.doc.tor. We are not running Antora. And ASCII.doc.tor needs plain ASCII.doc. And the include statements in ASCII.doc.tor and Antora are a little bit different. In Antora, each page in the website, you have a different file, and then you can even have example files, partial files that make the source content distributed in a lot of very small files. So, and our build system is just ASCII.doc and is not able to understand the include statement in Antora. So we had some translation to do, and I have maintained for 2 years a bash script that was hundreds of lines long, just to substitute every include statement, to change all the cross-reference statements to make them work for the production system. And then with Antora assembler, suddenly, I just have 2 files. One file is a file that I can copy from one repository to another, and which is just the Antora assembler YAML file. So it's 8 lines of code, and it just tells Antora to take all content, a complete module, and from a complete module produce one ASCII.doc file. And the second thing is a script that does small adaptation to that file produced by Antora. So here I've put just a very basic customization script. We do a little bit more, like we change the title, we add some attributes, some things like that. The beauty of it is that now you don't need to understand Bash to do downstreaming. So you can just copy files and it works. So that's, I believe that's the main benefit, is that writers that are interested only in content can very happily start using Antora and be successful with it without first having to understand Bash or not, or learn how to do basic programming. So that's really big feature for us and for me. With attributes, you can modify inline content. With includes, you can modify block of content. And with the Antora collector extension, you can modify entire files, and you can also add entire files. And we have been using that for two kinds of stuff. To run a command to validate the language, for example, so to do some commands that we don't want to run before, and to also to generate reference content, so content that is in a YAML file in a code, so that describes an API. Content that is in an ini file and that describes the option for a command line. So you can grab the content from the code of the application and transform it into content for the application. So that's one more shift left here. It's you don't even write the reference documentation. You write it directly in the code. So this extension is just also magical because you can integrate your scripts directly in Antora. You don't need to have a build orchestrator like Tox or let's say Ansible to compose the different steps that you need to single source. So you don't need to have a preprocessor before running Antora. You can let Antora run all of that in one command. That's, in terms of simplifying the user experience, it's really great. I put this extension at the end because it's just one line to put in the Antora playbook, and maybe 3 lines if you want to customize the extension. But that's just the first Antora extension that came. And it's adding a search to an Antora website. That's just a must-have. That's just magical. And then I want to talk also about extension that you write yourself. There are 2 cases where I have written extensions. It's one extension that does the same thing as the collector does, but after building the website. So the collector is running before. I needed to have the same thing after, so the collector cannot do that. But writing an extension is so simple that it's not a problem. And then modifying the entire outline. I will show the example after that. That's a little bit more complex example. It's in a case where we wanted to remove content from the outline. And the collector is good to add content, but was not good to remove content. So first example, it's a very simple extension that just does one thing, is once the site, when Antora has finished to build the site, so this on site published, this extension is running an external command. In this case, it's HTML test. It's logging the outputs to the console. So that's quite simple. That doesn't require very complex engineering knowledge, and it's very powerful. So here, when you run Antora, directly after that, we run HTML test to verify that there is no broken links. And that's simple. We can do more crazy stuff with Antora extension. This one is doing something a little bit more complex. In this example, we are just removing in the navigation file all the cross-reference that are about doing something locally, because that's something that we don't want in the downstream documentation. So we remove entire sections, entire pages. We remove them from the downstream docs. We just remove the line in the navigation, in the nav.adoc. Then we remove the page from the content. So from the content that we have cached when we run the downstreaming, we will scan the entire components, the entire guide as a new content. So that's a way to entirely rewrite the complete component. That's also super powerful because with that, we have something to modify inline content, something to modify blocks, something to add files, and something to remove files. So we have all the options about content modification that are covered. And we are so happy. So we need not much more now. We have everything to work. Just that it's a little bit complex. The last extension is when I showed these slides to the Antora community, people told me, you should talk about Antora Atlas. And I have not used this extension yet, but it's used in the Spring IO documentation. And what it does is just, it's just amazing. So it's think about sitemap. So you have a feature that is very common now. It's the sitemap.xml that is in the website. So that's something that search engines are using to index your content. So Antora Atlas is taking this idea, is pushing it a little bit further. So it's producing something like a sitemap, but with some more metadata, and it feeds this metadata. So this a little bit richer sitemap to let people build only a subset of the documentation, but with the knowledge of everything that is published in the production website. Let's take, so I cannot take examples that are mine, but let's take the Spring IO example. You have a gazillion of guides. And when you want to build everything, it takes minutes. Let's say 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, I don't know. But if you build only the content that you are interested into, let's say you just want to build one component, then the build is running in seconds. So this extension would make it possible to, let's say for Red Hat, to run all the documentation website, all the customer portal with Antora. That could be possible with an extension like that. That's it. So here are the page with the credits. You have links for Antora ASCII doc for the background photo, and for some repositories that are using Antora in upstream and in downstream, and for some documentation that has been built with Antora somewhere in the process. Voilà.
Welcome, both of you. Thank you for that very interesting talk. You've got some really good questions. I know that you answered some of them in the Q&A, but we might actually ask you to revisit a few of those because I think we could get into a little more depth with them. But thank you for joining us. Now, here's a question. If you were building this pipeline from scratch again, what would you do differently? Are there tools that you wish you hadn't used, for example, or tools that you wish you had used that you know are out there now?
So yeah, so this question is very tricky because if I could start from scratch the publication to the customer portal, so if I could change the tool in the customer portal, or if I have this as something that is there that it cannot change. So that's the thing. Because if I would have the choice, I would run the customer portal with Antora. We have Atlas, everything needed to run it like that. So that's my. If I would have a magic wand, I would do that. I would say, hey, make something so that the tooling can handle everything with Antora. It would be much more simple for projects that are upstream based in general, because it will be, hey, you start an Antora project and we have simple stuff to downstream. And here the most complex part is to transform something in Antora, which are in small files, very well organized, into one monolithic file, and so everything in one bucket, and so that the complexity of the toolchain is to get from something where it's modern to something where, in fact, we have to transform from ASCII doc to docbook, and this constraint is the biggest constraint. And here, the biggest thing, so I already restarted from scratch what I was doing. So I started with a huge bash script. I used tools that I knew. So I started with Ansible, but it didn't work very well. So then I switched to Tox. So I started with other tools, and Antora was not ready for that. So the Antora assembler extension didn't exist. And then there was this Antora extension where with 3 lines of YAML, I replaced 300 lines of bash, or maybe more. So that's what is there. So the bash script that remains is 50 lines. It's quite small. It's quite understandable. It's still not the best, but it's I can transfer the knowledge better to another writer also. So that's for me that's huge. And what I would like is to have the assembler extension do everything for me directly, but that's a little bit much asking, because I'm removing a lot of things that are smartly done by the Antora assembler, but that are too smart and that do an ugly output in the customer portal. So for now, that's the best that we have at the moment. So that's a huge enabler, because you can have downstream done automatically entirely. So for OpenShift local to do a change of release, we have just to change one metadata in one file and create a branch in Git, and then the processing is done directly on the continuous integration. So I change the metadata, and I could during the holidays, during this summer, I could hand over the project to a colleague and tell her just, once it's ready, you edit one file here, and you create a branch with this name, and then you're ready to publish. And she could do that without understanding what is under the hood, but she could do just very simple procedure. Okay, change the name of the branch here, and the rest was all handled automatically. So
that's nice. That's nice.
That was for me. That was like, okay, I know that she can in 1 hour do a release, and I can go on holidays, and I know everything is going to be all right. So that with the previous system, so the one with a big bash script, I could not automate everything. There was some action that I could only do on my laptop, I tried to hand over to colleagues, and they were stuck. So each time it was broken, they were entirely stuck, and I had to do some firefighting. And now this toolchain is in a project where I'm not working anymore in the project. It's working since 1 year. It works. They can do release. They don't ask me for the release. They could fix. There was a GitLab change something, a variable name. They managed to fix it by themselves. And so for me, that's just ticking all the boxes. So they became autonomous in handling the thing.
So Alexander, do you have anything to add?
Well, at the moment we're publishing to a system that understands only an ASCII doc, like plain ASCII doc.
Right.
And I could imagine a system that, well, the downstream system could be Antora, but it could also be like a system that accepts just plain or well-formed HTML. So that's also something that Antora would support quite well, that you have these simple pages being published as HTML and handed over to another system, and then it can style it, can do whatever indexing it wants to do on top of it. Yeah, so I think it's possible to put a lot of different downstream systems to Antora, depending on the amount of work you want to put in. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Well, how about this? I know that this was answered a little bit in chat, but what is the experience like? Do you have any authors who are brand new to Doxis code? And if so, what is their experience with this environment, and how do you help them? You did put some links in there, but I think we would like something a little more than that.
So for the downstream to the downstream upstream thing, they don't have to know much. So the first thing is just they are protected from going into the details of the implementation. They just know, hey, now you write contents. It's ASCII doc. It's Antora. It's in a page. In Antora, it's called a page, and they get there. So we get them into onboarding, into writing Antora documentation. And if you, I don't want it to be a Red Hat internal discussion, but writing pages in Antora, it's much more simple than what we have in modular docs at Red Hat. So they have the simplest experience in writing ASCII doc file within Antora, because we don't use a lot of metadata, so a lot of statements that are required usually in Red Hat docs, we don't use them. So they have the most pristine Antora experience. And then IntelliJ, the IntelliJ plugin, you put them in front of the IntelliJ plugin that has Antora support, and I know that I have some colleagues who don't even install Antora and don't even build with Antora because they are so happy with that. And sometimes,
that's good to hear. That's really good to hear.
It's like,
it's about the confidence. If you can set up an environment where you say, I write some text, I see it in my preview, and I'm confident that it will look exactly the same, or the same enough, or in 99%, I'm confident enough to just commit it because I saw it in my preview. And then let's wait for the next build to run it on GitHub. Yeah. And if you get an editing environment where you have that confidence in the preview, I think that's great. And that really adds to the writer's experience. To set it all up, you might still want to have an engineer within reach to set it up initially. But once it's been set up initially, you wouldn't need that engineering support to do the real content work afterwards.
So somebody more technical to help you kind of get your environment in order, and then it becomes just more a push button kind of experience.
Yeah, like all the GitHub actions, all the scripts that are written, getting up the YAML, setting up repositories, all that. It might be a writer with technical experience in that in that environment, but if your technical writers don't have the experience, you might have to have a DocuOps person of whatever.
Yeah,
that's really helpful.
Well, we're on our final question now, and we are right up on time. So let's ask this. If I understood correctly, this is what the question says. The automatic checks mentioned can be developed as an internal extension file an internal extension configuration file for IntelliJ IDE on the Ruby language. Is that correct?
Well, it's a mix.
Okay.
So you can have different kind of checks, right? So you can have Veil as a checker for Doxis code, and you can integrate that both as in your IDE, so you can have it highlighted in your IDE, or so in your continuous integration. So that's one way to do it. These checks need to be configured very individually for each project. But there are other checks that come automatically with Antora and AsciiDoc, for example. All internal links are checked by Antora already. And you might then add some additional text on top of it. Like, I don't know, Fabrice, you added an HTML link checker, external link checker that you added as a plugin into Antora. Yeah, so some engineering work comes in there, but it's probably more time that we need to cover. Yeah.
Well, I very much enjoyed your daughter making a guest appearance, Fabrice. Thank you for that. We mentioned her in your intro, and there she was.
About tests. There are the tests that you can do are in the IDE. That's one thing. So you can configure your repository to integrate tests that you do in the IDE, and there are some tests that you can do in the CI. So in GitLab, GitHub, Bitbucket, whatever you get provider, and they can integrate, so you can run the same in the IDE and on the CI. So use the same configuration file. That's what we do a lot. We have Veil that is run independently on the pull request, and that says, hey, this word is not compliant to the style guide. So it's very visible in the pull request. And we also encourage the writers to install it locally, and then it depends on their ability to set it up. It very much depends from the colleagues, from their implications. So some they prefer to have done everything on their machine and to have nothing appear in the wild, and some they prefer to wait longer, so turtle mode. Thank you, Eva. They prefer to wait longer, and they can see the results. It's quite open.
Okay, well, thank you very much.